They wanted to reward me, but I didn't use the Apache girls. I gave them freedom. Wild West story. The morning sun rose over the small frontier town of Red Rock, casting long shadows across dusty streets and wooden buildings. It was the kind of place where life moved slowly, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Children ran barefoot along the dirt roads, their laughter echoing against the walls of the saloons and general stores. Horses neighed in the corrals, and the occasional wagon creaked as it made its way down the main street. Despite the lively morning scene, a sense of unease lingered in the air. There was tension beneath the surface, the kind of tension that everyone tried to ignore, but could never fully escape. Thomas Harper, a young man in his early 20s, leaned against the side of the small blacksmith shop he worked at. His hands were rough and calloused from years of swinging hammers and tending the forge, yet his eyes held a quiet intelligence and determination. He had grown up in Red Rock, learning the ways of the frontier from his father and neighbors. From a young age, Thomas had been taught the importance of honesty, hard work, and above all, respect for others. These lessons had shaped him into a man known for courage and a strong sense of justice. While others in the town were content to focus only on their own survival or profit, Thomas often felt a responsibility to do what was right, even when it was dangerous or unpopular. That morning, Thomas was approached by a man he had seen many times before in the market, a wealthy trader named Elias McGraw. Elias was known throughout the region for his wealth, his connections, and his sometimes questionable business practices. He had a sharp tongue and a quick temper, but he also had a reputation for rewarding those who served his interests well. Thomas watched as Elias rode up on his horse, the sun glinting off the silver buttons of his coat. The horse's hooves kicked up clouds of dust, and the trader's eyes seemed to scan the town, as if measuring its value and worth. "Thomas Harper," Elias called out, dismounting from his horse with a practiced ease. "I have a proposition for you, one that could make you wealthy beyond your dreams." His voice was smooth but carried an edge, a subtle warning beneath the promise of reward. Thomas straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with a cloth, and nodded cautiously. He had a feeling he knew what this proposition might involve, but he remained silent, waiting for the man to continue. Elias led Thomas to the edge of town, to a small, hidden enclosure made of rough timber. Inside, several young Apache girls were held. They were frightened and huddled together, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. The sight of them made Thomas's stomach tighten. He had heard stories of raids and conflicts between settlers and native tribes, but seeing the children in person stirred something deep within him. They were not just names in a story or distant figures in the news. They were real, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of those around them. "These girls," Elias began, his tone almost businesslike, "are yours for the taking. Or rather, they could serve a purpose for you. You help me manage them, and I will reward you handsomely. There is gold in it for you, Thomas, more than you have ever seen in your life. You could leave this town a rich man." He paused, letting the offer sink in, and then added with a sly smile, "Of course, there are other ways they could be useful to you, if you understand what I mean." Thomas felt his stomach churn. He had expected temptation, but not one so blatant, so cruel. The idea of taking advantage of these girls, treating them as objects rather than human beings, made his skin crawl. He thought of the lessons his father had taught him, of the importance of honor and morality, and he knew instantly that he could not, would not, do what Elias suggested. But the offer was dangerous. Refusing a man like Elias McGraw could have consequences: threats, violence, even ostracization from the town. Yet Thomas could not ignore the faces of the frightened girls, their wide, innocent eyes silently pleading for protection. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "I won't do it," he said quietly, but firmly. "I can't use them. I won't. They are not here for anyone to take advantage of." His voice, though calm, carried a strength that surprised even him. Elias's expression darkened, his smile disappearing. He had expected compliance, perhaps hesitation, but not outright refusal. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but Thomas did not flinch. He met the trader's gaze evenly, without fear. "You're a fool, Thomas Harper," Elias spat, his voice rising. "A damned fool if you think you can refuse me and walk away unscathed. Do you have any idea what you are risking? Wealth, security, respect, all gone because of some misplaced sense of morality?" His words were sharp, but Thomas remained unmoved. Deep down, he knew that no amount of gold or comfort could outweigh the damage that would come from betraying his conscience and the girl's trust. The girls watched silently from the enclosure, sensing the tension between the two men. Their fear was palpable, but there was also a flicker of hope in their eyes as they looked at Thomas. He was the first person who had spoken to them not as captives, not as property, but as human beings deserving of dignity and protection. That small connection, simple as it was, gave Thomas a sense of clarity. He knew what he had to do, even if he did not yet know how to do it. Thomas spent the rest of the morning carefully observing the surroundings, noting the movements of guards, the layout of the town, and possible escape routes. He knew that any rash action could endanger the girls and himself. Patience would be essential. He also began thinking about allies, anyone who might quietly support him if the situation became dangerous. While many in Red Rock were self-interested, he hoped that some would understand the rightness of his cause, even if they did not openly help. As the sun climbed higher, the town continued its daily routines, seemingly unaware of the moral storm brewing at its edge. Merchants shouted prices from their stalls, horses trotted along the streets, and the scent of baking bread and coffee drifted from the few establishments that offered breakfast. To everyone else, it was just another day. But for Thomas, the day marked the beginning of a journey that would test every ounce of his courage and conviction. By midday, Thomas had made his decision. He would not accept the reward. He would not follow the path of greed and exploitation laid before him. Instead, he would protect the girls, and if possible, return them to safety. The thought of the dangers ahead, pursuers, angry townsfolk, perhaps even violence, did not deter him. What mattered most was doing what was right. In his heart he understood that true courage was not measured by wealth or fame, but by the willingness to stand up for others, even when it was dangerous or inconvenient. As he prepared for the coming hours, Thomas reflected on his life in Red Rock. He had faced many challenges before, from harsh winters to disputes over land and resources, but nothing had felt as morally pressing as this. He realized that his choices today could define him for the rest of his life. The opportunity to act with integrity, to make a real difference in the lives of others, was rare in the harsh world of the frontier. He could not waste it. The day passed slowly, each hour a test of patience and planning. Thomas kept a careful eye on the girls, speaking to them softly when they seemed too frightened to eat or move. He offered small reassurances, letting them know they were not alone. Though they did not fully understand him, they began to sense his sincerity. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, they allowed themselves a moment of hope, a flicker of trust. That trust would become the foundation of the daring plans Thomas would soon put into motion. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the town in shades of gold and orange, Thomas was ready to act. He had studied the patterns of the guards, memorized the paths that would avoid detection, and quietly prepared the girls for what was to come. Each of them had a small bundle of belongings, mostly scraps of food and pieces of clothing, enough for the journey ahead. The danger was real, but so was the possibility of freedom, and Thomas's resolve had never been stronger. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Thomas took a final look at the town, the enclosure, and the girls who depended on him. He knew that once he moved, there would be no turning back. The decision he had made in the bright morning hours, to protect and free rather than exploit, would set into motion a series of events that could change all their lives. With a deep breath and steady hands, he prepared to step into the night, carrying with him not gold or wealth, but something far more valuable: hope, courage, and the promise of freedom. As night fell over Red Rock, the town seemed to settle into an uneasy quiet. The once bustling streets were now empty, lit only by the flickering lanterns in the windows of homes and shops. A cool breeze whispered through the alleyways, rustling the wooden signs of the saloons and general stores. In the shadows, Thomas Harper moved carefully, his boots barely making a sound on the hard-packed dirt streets. Every sense was alert, every nerve on edge. He knew that one wrong move could ruin everything, for him, for the girls, for anyone who tried to help. But he also knew that waiting any longer would risk the girls being moved or harmed. The time to act had come. Thomas approached the enclosure where the girls were held. The faint glow of a lantern revealed their small, frightened faces pressed against the wooden slats of the fence. Their eyes widened as they recognized him, a mix of fear and hope, reflecting in their expressions. He knelt down beside them and spoke softly, careful not to raise his voice too high. "I'm here to help you," he said gently. "I'm going to get you out of here. You don't have to be afraid anymore." For a moment, the girls said nothing. They had been through so much, captured in raids, taken from their families, and now facing strangers who only seemed to bring more danger. Thomas understood their hesitation. Trust was something that had been stolen from them, and it would take time to regain it. He took a deep breath and continued, keeping his words calm and steady. "You have a choice. You can come with me, and I will make sure you are safe. No one will hurt you. Do you understand?" Slowly, a few of the girls nodded, their small hands clutching each other. Thomas gave them a reassuring smile and motioned for them to follow him quietly. He had planned the route carefully, knowing the patrols of the town and the traders' men. They would have to move quickly and silently through the forest behind the town, a path he had explored before, but never under such tense circumstances. Every step would have to be measured, every sound controlled. The first challenge came almost immediately. A pair of guards was stationed near the back of the enclosure, their torches swinging as they spoke in low voices. Thomas signaled for the girls to crouch down behind a stack of barrels. His heart pounded as he waited for the guards to pass. He knew that if they were seen, the situation could turn deadly in an instant. The minutes felt like hours, but finally, the guards moved on, their conversation fading into the night. Thomas led the girls carefully through a narrow gap in the fence, keeping them close together. He whispered instructions to stay quiet, to move slowly, to follow his lead. The girls obeyed, their small hands clutching his as he guided them through the darkness. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves made their hearts race, but Thomas remained calm, a steady presence in the chaos of fear. His mind raced with plans, contingencies, and escape routes. He had to anticipate every possibility, from the townsfolk who might stumble upon them to wild animals that roamed the forest. As they moved deeper into the woods, the girls began to relax slightly, sensing that Thomas genuinely cared for their safety. One of the older girls, perhaps 12 or 13, whispered her thanks, her voice trembling with relief. Thomas smiled softly but reminded them to stay silent. "We're not safe yet," he said. "Keep moving. Don't stop until we're far from here." The forest was dark and thick, but Thomas knew it well enough to navigate. He had spent years exploring the surrounding land, learning the hidden paths and natural shelters. This knowledge was now crucial. He guided the girls along narrow trails that twisted through trees and underbrush, avoiding the main roads and open clearings. Every step was calculated, every direction chosen to minimize the risk of being seen. Hours passed as they moved silently through the forest. The moon, a thin sliver in the sky, provided just enough light to see by, but not enough to give away their position. Thomas kept glancing behind them, listening for any signs of pursuit. The girls followed him faithfully, their initial fear slowly giving way to cautious trust. They whispered among themselves, sharing small comforts, like holding hands or sharing a scrap of bread, but always with Thomas's guidance to stay quiet. At one point, they came to a shallow stream that cut through the forest. The water glistened under the moonlight, and Thomas knew crossing it would be tricky. The girls were hesitant, their small feet trembling on the wet rocks. Thomas encouraged them gently. "Step carefully, one at a time," he said. "I'll help you. Don't worry. We'll get across safely." With his steady hands and calm voice, they crossed the stream without incident, each step building their confidence. As they continued, Thomas noticed the sounds of the town fading behind them. The distant barking of dogs, the creaking of wagon wheels, and the occasional shout were replaced by the quiet hum of the forest. Crickets chirped, leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, and the girls' breathing began to steady. For the first time since their capture, they felt a sense of possibility, a chance that freedom might actually be within reach. Thomas knew that the journey was not over. The forest, though safer than the town, held its own dangers. Wild animals prowled the area, and the terrain could be treacherous. He kept a sharp eye out for signs of danger, scanning the shadows and listening for any unusual sounds. His training, his knowledge of the land, and his unwavering determination were their best protection. As they neared a small ridge that led to a hidden valley, Thomas stopped and whispered to the girls to rest briefly. They huddled together, exhausted but relieved, and Thomas shared a small portion of food he had brought. They ate in silence, the trust between them growing stronger with every shared gesture. He spoke softly to them, telling them stories to distract from fear and to give them hope. He reminded them that they were brave, that they were capable, and that they were almost safe. After a short rest, Thomas led them down into the valley, where the trees grew thicker and the terrain offered natural protection from anyone who might be following. He knew of a small clearing where travelers could hide, and that became their next stop. The girls, tired but alert, followed closely, their faith in Thomas unwavering. By the time they reached the clearing, the first light of dawn was beginning to touch the horizon. Thomas paused to let the girls catch their breath and to survey the area. The forest seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but he knew better. Danger could appear at any moment, and he remained vigilant. He whispered to the girls that they would soon reach a place where they would be truly safe, a place where they could rest without fear of capture. The girls began to show signs of hope, their voices soft but audible as they spoke among themselves. Thomas smiled, knowing that this hope was fragile but real. He encouraged them gently, reminding them to stay together and keep moving. Every step brought them closer to freedom, closer to the chance at a life where they could make their own choices and no longer live in fear. As they continued through the forest, Thomas thought about the challenges ahead. Returning the girls to their people would not be easy. There were rivers to cross, hills to climb, and hostile territory to navigate. But he was determined. He would not falter, he would not turn back, and he would protect them no matter what. The girls, sensing his resolve, followed without hesitation. By midday they had traveled several miles, leaving the town of Red Rock far behind. The forest had grown dense, the air cooler, and the sounds of wildlife filled the silence between their movements. Thomas felt a quiet pride in the girls' resilience and bravery. Despite their fear and exhaustion, they had trusted him and followed his lead, and now that trust had brought them this far. As they paused again to rest, Thomas considered their next steps. He knew of a friendly Apache settlement not far from their current location. If he could guide the girls there, they would be safe among their own people. He also knew that any misstep could result in them being captured again. Every decision had to be carefully weighed, every action deliberate. But Thomas's courage, patience, and knowledge of the land were his greatest assets. With renewed determination, he led the girls onward. The journey was long and difficult, but every mile brought them closer to freedom. Thomas understood that their trust in him was a responsibility he could not take lightly. He would do everything in his power to ensure that these girls, who had suffered so much, would finally taste the relief and safety they deserved. By evening, the group had made significant progress. The girls were exhausted, but their spirits were higher than ever. Thomas encouraged them, telling stories of hope and survival, reminding them that they were almost there. He promised that soon they would be safe, free to live without fear. And as the sun set behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the forest, Thomas Harper felt a quiet but deep satisfaction. He was doing what he knew was right, and no matter what dangers lay ahead, he would see this through to the end. The forest began to thin as Thomas and the girls pressed onward. By mid-morning, sunlight filtered through the tall pines, casting a soft golden glow over the winding paths. Birds chirped in the treetops, and the rustle of leaves seemed almost musical. Yet Thomas knew better than to let the peaceful sounds fool him. Danger still lingered. He had no way of knowing if the traders' men had discovered their escape or if other strangers might stumble upon them. Each step had to be deliberate, each sound calculated. The girls, though exhausted from the night's journey, began to move with a little more confidence. They trusted Thomas implicitly now, following his lead without question. Occasionally, one of them would glance back toward the distant horizon, where the town of Red Rock lay hidden beneath the morning haze. Though far away, the thought of leaving it behind stirred a mixture of relief and anxiety. These were girls who had been taken from their homes, separated from families, and now, for the first time in weeks, or perhaps months, they had a real chance at freedom. Thomas glanced at them, his heart swelling with both pride and protectiveness. "Almost there," he whispered, though they could barely hear him over the crunch of their boots on the forest floor. "We're very close. Just a little further, and you'll be safe." The girls nodded, their small faces set with determination. He could see the fear lingering in their eyes, but also hope beginning to shine through. That hope was fragile, but it was real, and Thomas would do everything in his power to protect it. As they reached a small ridge, Thomas paused to survey the land ahead. Beyond the trees lay a wide valley dotted with clearings and small streams. He knew that somewhere within that valley was a friendly Apache settlement. It was a place where the girls could find not only safety, but also the warmth and familiarity of their own people. He pointed toward the valley. "Do you see that? Down there in the trees? That's where we're going. You'll be safe there, I promise." The girls' eyes lit up at the sight, and for a brief moment their exhaustion seemed to lift. But the journey was not yet over. The path down the ridge was steep and treacherous. Loose rocks and hidden roots threatened to trip them at every step. Thomas moved carefully, testing each foothold before guiding the girls down. One of the younger girls slipped on a rock, but Thomas caught her just in time. "Careful," he whispered, steadying her. "It's all right. I've got you." She clutched his arm, trembling, but nodded. Each small victory bolstered their courage, and Thomas felt a renewed determination to see them safely to their destination. The first obstacle came in the form of a small river cutting through the valley. The water flowed swiftly, glinting in the morning sun. Thomas had anticipated this, and he knew exactly where to cross safely. "Follow me closely," he instructed. "Step carefully on the stones. Don't rush." The girls lined up behind him, each placing a foot cautiously on the slippery rocks. Thomas steadied them when necessary, whispering words of encouragement. One by one they made it across, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. Once on the other side, Thomas led them through the final stretch of forest before the settlement. The girls were growing more confident now, whispering quietly to each other and even managing small smiles. For Thomas, these moments of relief were bittersweet. He knew that the real challenge was not only getting them here safely, but also making the right choice once they reached their people. They had grown attached to him, trusted him completely, and he had to ensure that this trust was not misplaced. As they neared the edge of the settlement, the girls began to chatter softly among themselves, excited and nervous about what awaited them. Thomas could hear voices in the distance, and the occasional sound of children playing. This was a stark contrast to the fear and silence of the past few days. The settlement appeared as a small cluster of homes and huts, surrounded by natural barriers and protected by the community itself. It was safe, familiar, and welcoming, a stark difference from the harshness of the frontier town they had left behind. When they finally arrived at the outskirts of the settlement, Thomas slowed, allowing the girls to take in their surroundings. The relief in their faces was clear. They whispered among themselves, pointing out familiar landmarks, and Thomas could see the tension in their shoulders melt slightly. But even as they relaxed, Thomas knew he had a critical moment ahead. He could not simply leave the girls here and walk away. He had to ensure their safety, gain the trust of their community, and prepare for the possibility of confrontations with those who might come looking for them. The leader of the settlement, a wise and respected elder named White Feather, noticed their approach and came forward. His eyes were sharp but kind, and he immediately sensed the seriousness of the situation. "Who brings these children?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. Thomas stepped forward, keeping his tone respectful. "I'm Thomas Harper," he said. "They were held captive in the town of Red Rock. I've brought them here to keep them safe and return them to their people." White Feather studied him for a moment, his gaze piercing. "You risked much to bring them here?" he said slowly. "Why? What is your purpose?" Thomas looked at the girls and then back at the elder. "Because it is right," he said simply. "These girls deserve freedom. They are not property. They should not be used for anyone's gain. I could not stand by and let that happen." The elder's eyes softened slightly, and he nodded. "You have done what few would have the courage to do," he said. "These girls are safe now. You have my gratitude and the gratitude of their families." Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was one thing to get them here safely, but gaining the trust of the community was another challenge entirely. The elder's acceptance meant that the girls could finally feel secure and that their journey toward freedom was nearly complete. The girls, sensing that they were truly safe, began to relax fully. One of the older girls ran toward White Feather, speaking in her native language, while the younger ones clung together, smiles breaking through their fearful expressions. Thomas watched quietly, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and humility. He had led them here, kept them safe through a treacherous journey, and now they were in the hands of those who could protect and guide them further. Yet, even in this moment of triumph, Thomas knew that the story was not over. Word of his actions would likely reach Red Rock, and not everyone would understand his choice. Some might see his refusal to take a reward or exploit the girls as foolish or even dangerous. But Thomas did not waver in his conviction. He had acted with integrity, with courage, and with a commitment to doing what was right. That was all that mattered to him now. As the sun began to set over the valley, casting long shadows over the settlement, Thomas sat quietly, watching the girls integrate back into their community. They laughed softly, shared stories, and began to reconnect with the familiar customs and traditions of their people. For Thomas, the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming, but it was not pride in the usual sense. It was a deep, quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that he had made a difference in the lives of those who had no power to protect themselves. Thomas knew that leaving them now would be bittersweet. He had grown attached to their courage, their resilience, and their trust in him. But he also knew that this was the right moment to step back. The girls were safe, and the community would provide the care and protection they needed. He had done his part, and now it was time for them to take the next steps toward rebuilding their lives. Before departing, Thomas spoke quietly to Whitefeather. "If anyone comes looking for them, I will do what I can to protect them," he said. The elder nodded. "Your actions have already spoken louder than any words," he replied. "These children are free because of you." "That is a reward no gold can match." Thomas smiled faintly, understanding the truth in those words. The reward he had refused, the money, the comfort, the recognition, was insignificant compared to the freedom he had helped restore. The girls' lives, their safety, and their future were worth far more than anything material. And as he walked back into the forest to make his own way home, he felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had acted with courage, integrity, and humanity, and that choice would remain with him forever. The journey back through the forest was quieter, almost reflective. Thomas thought about the events of the past days, about the fear and courage, about the moral choices that had defined his path. He realized that freedom, trust, and dignity were the most precious things a person could offer, and he had been fortunate enough to help restore them to those who needed it most. As night fell once again, Thomas finally reached a small clearing where he could rest. The stars shone brightly above, and the cool night air carried the sounds of the wilderness. He sat quietly, reflecting on the events of the day. The girls were safe, their lives forever changed for the better, and Thomas, though still weary and cautious, felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that he had done what was right, no matter the cost. Word of Thomas Harper's actions traveled faster than he had expected. By the next morning, whispers had begun circulating through Red Rock. The townspeople were curious, gossiping quietly at the market, in the blacksmith shop, and outside the saloon. Some spoke in awe of Thomas's courage, while others muttered in disbelief, calling him foolish or reckless. Many were intrigued by the mystery of the missing girls, wondering how they had vanished from the trader's grasp without a trace. The story had a way of growing with every retelling, and soon Thomas realized that his decision would not go unnoticed or unchallenged. It wasn't long before Elias McGraw, the wealthy trader who had first offered Thomas the reward, discovered what had happened. Furious, he stormed into town, his horse kicking up dust as he shouted and demanded answers. The townspeople stepped aside, murmuring nervously, and Thomas felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Elias's anger was palpable, and his reputation for being ruthless meant that Thomas had to be careful. This confrontation could easily turn violent if handled incorrectly. Thomas met Elias in the town square, his stance firm but calm. "I told you," he said, his voice steady. "I will not use those girls. They are not property. They are human beings. I've brought them to safety, and that is enough." Elias's eyes blazed with anger, his face turning red as he clenched his fists. "Enough!" he shouted. You've ruined everything. You've disobeyed me, refused my reward, and taken what belongs to me. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Thomas held his ground, refusing to be intimidated. "I have done what is right," he said quietly, but with unwavering conviction. "No reward, no pressure, and no threat can change that. These girls are free, and nothing will change that." His words carried a power beyond mere defiance. They carried honesty, courage, and a moral clarity that few in the town could match. Some of the townspeople began to murmur among themselves. A few nodded quietly in Thomas's favor, respecting his bravery and integrity. Others shook their heads, believing that Thomas had been reckless and foolish. The tension in the square grew as the townsfolk waited to see how the confrontation would unfold. Thomas remained composed, his eyes fixed on Elias. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture angrily. He simply stood there, embodying the principle that had guided his actions from the very beginning. Elias, however, was not easily calmed. He spat on the ground, his anger boiling over.
"You think you are a hero?" he sneered. "You think that saving a few girls makes you better than the rest of us?"
"You are nothing but a fool, Thomas Harper, a fool who has made powerful enemies." Thomas met his gaze without flinching. "A fool I may be," he replied, "but at least I am not cruel. I did not betray my conscience, and I did not harm those who could not defend themselves. That is more than I can say for those who exploit others for personal gain." The townspeople watched in silence, captivated by the exchange. Some felt admiration, others disbelief, but all could sense that Thomas had taken a stand that few would dare. His courage had become a quiet example, a reminder that integrity and humanity could triumph even in a harsh world. Meanwhile, the memory of the girls' frightened faces and their journey to safety lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed the confrontation. It was impossible to ignore the moral weight of Thomas's actions. Despite the public attention, Thomas knew that the real consequences were not in the town square, but within the broader region. Word of the missing girls might reach the traders, bounty hunters, or even hostile neighbors who saw opportunity in the chaos. He had to be vigilant, ready to protect both himself and those who depended on him. While he had ensured the girls' safety, his own life could still be at risk. And yet, he remained unshaken. The knowledge that he had done what was right outweighed any fear or uncertainty. Some townspeople approached Thomas quietly, offering words of support. "You did the right thing," an older woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've never seen such courage. You risked your life for children who could not defend themselves. That is true heroism." Others nodded, shaking their heads in disbelief, but unable to deny the strength of his moral stand. The town was divided, but Thomas did not concern himself with approval or criticism. His conscience was clear, and that was enough. Elias, meanwhile, continued to fume. He summoned a few of his men, hoping to intimidate Thomas or recover what he claimed was his property. But Thomas's steadfastness, combined with the growing awareness among the townspeople, made it difficult for them to act without attracting attention. Even the men who had once followed Elias reluctantly began to hesitate, sensing the moral courage Thomas displayed. It became clear that the young man was not merely defying authority for his own gain. He was standing for justice, for freedom, and for the dignity of others. As the confrontation unfolded, Thomas reflected on the journey he had undertaken. He remembered the fear in the girls' eyes, the cautious trust they had placed in him, and the moments of courage they had shown along the way. Every decision he had made, every careful step he had taken had led to this point. He had chosen to act on principle even when it seemed dangerous or unpopular, and now he was facing the consequences of that choice. But in his heart he knew he had nothing to regret. The townspeople continued to watch, some whispering among themselves, others remaining silent. There was a sense of awe, as though they were witnessing something extraordinary. Thomas's defiance was not loud or boastful. It was quiet, unwavering, and deeply moral. He did not seek recognition or reward. He sought only to do what was right. And in doing so, he had become a living example of courage, integrity, and the power of standing up for those who could not stand for themselves. Elias, realizing that his threats would not sway Thomas, finally stormed off in frustration, his anger unresolved. The townspeople murmured among themselves, some offering grudging respect for Thomas, others still doubtful of his choices. But the moment had left its mark. Thomas had proven that one person guided by conscience and courage could challenge even the most powerful and unyielding figures. In the days that followed, Thomas's reputation in the town shifted. While some continued to view him as reckless, many began to admire his bravery and moral clarity. Children whispered about his daring actions, and elders recounted the story to anyone who would listen. The tale of Thomas Harper's courage spread beyond Red Rock, reaching nearby towns and settlements. People began to recognize that heroism was not measured by wealth, power, or influence, but by the willingness to stand for what is right, even when it comes at great personal risk. Thomas himself remained humble, quietly returning to his daily work while keeping a careful eye on the world around him. He understood that life in the frontier was never simple or predictable. Challenges would continue to arise, and dangers were always present. Yet he also knew that he had made a difference, that he had protected those who could not protect themselves, and that he had acted with unwavering integrity. At the Apache settlement, news of Thomas's actions had reached the community. The girls he had saved were welcomed back warmly, their families expressing deep gratitude for his bravery. The elder Whitefeather spoke of Thomas's courage, praising the young man for his selflessness and commitment to justice. The girls, now safe and free, spoke fondly of Thomas, remembering the quiet determination and steadfast care that had guided them through such a perilous journey. Through all of this, Thomas came to understand a fundamental truth. The choices we make, especially when difficult or dangerous, define who we are. Wealth, reward, and recognition are fleeting, but the act of doing what is right leaves a lasting impact. The memory of the girl's fear transforming into hope, the sense of moral clarity in the face of danger, and the knowledge that he had chosen courage over comfort, all of this would remain with him forever. In the end, Thomas Harper's story became a quiet legend in Red Rock and beyond. People spoke of the young man who risked everything to protect those who could not defend themselves. They marveled at his courage, his unwavering sense of justice, and his refusal to compromise his principles. Though he faced criticism, threats, and danger, he had acted according to his conscience, and in doing so, had proven that true bravery is measured not by gold or power, but by the willingness to do what is right. And so, the town of Red Rock continued to live its daily life, but with a renewed understanding of what courage and morality could look like. Children played a little more freely, parents spoke a little more openly about right and wrong, and Thomas Harper continued his life quietly, always vigilant, always guided by the same principles that had led him to risk everything for the freedom of others. His story was one of hope, of justice, and of the enduring power of human decency, even in the wild, unpredictable world of the frontier. Years passed, but the story of Thomas Harper and the Apache girls he had freed never faded from memory. Red Rock changed slowly, as frontier towns often did, with new families arriving, old buildings weathering under the sun, and children growing into adulthood. Yet the tale of the young man who risked everything for justice became part of the town's identity, told and retold at kitchens, markets, and around evening fires. People remembered not only the daring escape and the danger he had faced, but also the moral courage that had guided him every step of the way. Thomas himself continued living in Red Rock, quietly and humbly. He returned to his work at the blacksmith shop, forging tools, horseshoes, and anything else the townsfolk needed. His hands remained rough and calloused, and his face, now slightly lined with the passage of time, retained the calm determination that had defined him in his youth. Though he never sought recognition or reward, Thomas was quietly respected by those who knew him well. Some admired his bravery, others learned from his unwavering sense of morality, and many simply trusted him, knowing that he would act rightly in any situation. Despite the passage of time, Thomas never forgot the girls he had saved. He often wondered how they had grown, imagining them surrounded by family, learning the ways of their people, and thriving in safety. The knowledge that they had been returned to freedom and dignity filled him with a quiet pride, though he never boasted about it. The satisfaction came not from recognition or reward, but from the simple knowledge that he had done what was right, that lives had been changed for the better because of his actions. The girls, now women, grew into strong and capable members of their community. They often told their own children about the man who had guided them through danger, the man who had refused gold or reward in favor of justice. Their stories were filled with admiration and gratitude, highlighting Thomas's courage, patience, and kindness. In time, these stories spread beyond the settlement, reaching neighboring towns and even travelers who spoke of the young man who had acted with such integrity. Thomas's actions had set an example that resonated far beyond the boundaries of Red Rock or the forest paths he had used to guide the girls to safety. Occasionally, Thomas received visits from people who had heard of his bravery. Merchants, travelers, and even strangers from distant towns would stop by the blacksmith shop, wanting to meet the man who had risked everything to protect those who could not protect themselves. Thomas would greet them politely, answering questions modestly but never exaggerating the events. He preferred to let the story speak for itself, believing that actions carried more weight than words. In these moments, he realized that his choice to act rightly had ripple effects, influencing not only the girls' lives but the way others viewed courage, morality, and justice. Time also brought challenges, as life in the frontier was rarely simple or predictable. Thomas faced harsh winters, scarcity of resources, and occasional conflicts with those who valued profit over principle. Yet in every difficulty he remembered the lessons he had learned from his own journey: patience, careful planning, and unwavering commitment to what is right. These lessons guided him through troubles, helping him navigate the complexities of frontier life while remaining true to his moral compass. In Red Rock, the townspeople began to see the value of integrity more clearly. Thomas's example inspired others, young and old alike, to consider the consequences of their actions and to act with fairness and compassion. Children who heard the story of the freed girls grew up understanding the importance of courage and justice, while adults reconsidered the way they treated those who were vulnerable or powerless. Slowly but surely, the town itself changed, becoming a place where fairness and human dignity were valued alongside hard work and survival. Thomas also found quiet friendships and alliances with those who respected his moral clarity. Neighbors who had once been skeptical began to seek his advice, trusting his judgment in matters both practical and ethical. While he never sought power or recognition, Thomas became a subtle leader in the community. His influence felt in the way the town treated its people and resolved conflicts. His courage had created a legacy that went beyond the immediate act of saving the girls. It had shaped the character of an entire community. As years continued to pass, Thomas often reflected on the journey that had defined him. He remembered the fear in the girls' eyes, the long nights moving silently through the forest, and the challenges of navigating dangerous terrain. He thought about the moral choices he had made, the moments of doubt and the moments of courage that had carried them through. Each memory reminded him of the importance of integrity, bravery, and compassion. It was a reminder that one person's actions, guided by conscience, could make a profound difference in the lives of others. The Apache girls, now fully grown and strong, occasionally sent word to Thomas, letting him know that they were safe and thriving. They spoke of families, communities, and traditions, and each message carried deep gratitude for the man who had risked his life to give them freedom. Thomas treasured these messages, not for recognition or reward, but as confirmation that his actions had lasting impact. The knowledge that he had preserved lives, restored dignity, and inspired courage in others became a source of quiet fulfillment that no amount of gold could ever provide. As Thomas grew older, he realized that the true reward of his actions was not wealth or praise, but the lives he had touched and the moral example he had set. He understood that heroism was not measured by physical strength or daring alone, but by the willingness to act rightly in the face of danger, to protect the vulnerable, and to stand by one's conscience. This understanding became a guiding principle for the rest of his life, influencing every decision and shaping his character in profound ways. In the evenings, Thomas would often sit outside his home, watching the sun set over the hills and valleys of Red Rock. The peaceful scenery reminded him of the forest paths he had traveled with the girls and the quiet moments when courage and careful planning had ensured their safety. He reflected on the journey with humility, knowing that he had done what few would dare, and that his choices had changed lives for the better. The quiet satisfaction of knowing he had acted rightly was a reward far greater than any coin or accolade could offer. Over time, the story of Thomas Harper became a symbol of hope and moral courage. Travelers carried the tale to other towns, inspiring others to consider the importance of integrity, bravery, and justice. Young people learned from his example, understanding that doing what is right often requires risk, patience, and careful thought. And in the settlement where the girls had returned, families spoke of the man who had freed them with respect, gratitude, and admiration. Even in his later years, Thomas remained a quiet but steady presence in Red Rock. Though he lived simply, his life was full of meaning. He continued to work, to help those in need, and to act with integrity in every situation. People who knew him understood that he was a man who had chosen courage over comfort, principle over profit, and humanity over convenience. That choice had defined him and created a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. As the sun set one evening, casting long shadows across the town, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. He had lived a life guided by conscience, courage, and compassion. He had risked everything to protect those who could not protect themselves, and in doing so, he had changed lives, inspired others, and proven that true heroism lies in moral strength rather than material gain. The girls he had freed, now thriving and leading their own lives, were a living testament to the power of integrity and the enduring impact of one courageous decision. And so Thomas Harper's story continued to be told, not as a tale of wealth, fame, or conquest, but as a story of moral courage, bravery, and the enduring value of human dignity. His actions reminded generations that one person, guided by conscience and willing to act rightly, could make a profound difference in the world. In the hearts of those he touched and the community he influenced, Thomas's legacy of freedom, justice, and humanity lived on, inspiring countless others to act with courage and integrity in their own lives.